from the University of Otago, Professor Robert Patman joins us now to talk about the inauguration and the upcoming Trump, the next 4 years with Trump. Robert, thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Oh, sorry. Good evening. It's morning here. I'm in Almere, Netherlands, but it's great to see both you and Chewie, and I hope you're going to have a good 2025.
Yeah, I'm sure we will, especially if you're involved with us some more, Robert. Hey, do you want to tell us what are you in the Netherlands for? Is it a holiday? Is it business? Is it pleasure?
No, I'm speaking in The Hague on Wednesday. I just spoke at 3 German universities last week, Hamburg, Kiel, and also Nuremberg. And the week before I was in Toronto, so I spoke there. So, well, actually in Waterloo, Ontario. So, been a busy period, but I've also combining a bit of sort of work and pleasure here because I'm visiting my sister who lives in the Netherlands and her family. So it's brilliant to be here, but very cold. It's about -3 here.
Whoa. So that's the same as Dunedin because it's summer. So -3. So it's about the same. Some of those words you just rattled off, The Hague, but some pretty significant historical places you've been and are going to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a variety. I'm speaking at Leiden University, which is in The Hague. And they've got an institution there. It's the Leiden International Studies Centre, and that's where I've been invited to speak. But yeah, I've spoken on a variety of topics, and it's been good, I think, to have the opportunity. There's a lot of interest in New Zealand, and there's been, I think, Jacinda Ardern, it's fair to say, made a huge impact internationally, and a lot of people now take an interest in New Zealand and its view of the world. I think because Ardern put us on the map to some degree. Of course, other leaders made, like David Longy and others have made a big contribution, John Key. I'm not trying to say it was all down to Jacinda Ardern. I'm just saying I think there's a renewed interest in the country internationally because of that recent contribution to some degree.
And you also mentioned Nuremberg. There's some pretty big historical weight to that word as well. Is that just university based in there as well?
Yeah, it was Erlangen University, Nuremberg. And what would I speak about there? I spoke there about New Zealand and the post 9/11 strategic environment, looked at AUKUS, Ukraine and Gaza. So looking at New Zealand's response to 3 contemporary strategic challenges and tried to draw some implications for where we're at the moment and the direction where New Zealand needs to travel in 2025, and had some really good discussions. I spoke to about 40 master's students there as part of the presentation, and it was really fascinating, and it's really impressive. Just here, I spoke in English to them, and the students there were, it's their second language, clearly, but it was very impressive to have those conversations with them. All I can say, Pat, it's easy to get depressed about contemporary situations, but remember, there's a lot of very able young people coming through in our country, but in also overseas, and hopefully we'll get some better leadership in the future.
Well, what a perfect segue, Robert. Thank you for being the one professional on the panel tonight. We appreciate that. Whatever it is, it's midday on the 20th in the US, so that's probably going to be early morning here tomorrow morning. The 47th President of the United States gets sworn in, and that is a little bit sick in the back of my throat when I say this, but President Donald Trump. We have seen protests in the US against, but nothing like, the infamous January 6th, but we have seen people voicing their disapproval of the election of Mr. Trump. How do you think it's gone so far? How do you think it's going to start off a President Trump term?
I think this second Trump administration looks like it's going to be very different from the first. One of the lessons that President Trump has apparently taken from his first term in office between 2017 and 2021 was that he needs to have loyal people rather than able people in his cabinet. And I think he could be heading for the perfect storm because his tremendous focus on loyalty means he's trying to appoint a lot of people subject to Senate ratification that may not be up to the job. And so what's interesting, of course, that's the risk that all presidents take. But I think many people have been stunned by some of the appointments he's been trying to make. And yeah, so he's put loyalty above ability, really. And that's a big gamble given how ambitious his agenda is. For example, he wants to effectively expel 11 million illegal citizens, illegal people from who do not have US citizenship from the country. That's a huge logistical exercise and needs some very experienced people to do it. But we'll just see. I think there's a big question mark there. So I do think, yes, Mr. Trump, he probably doesn't see himself. I don't know, but he won't be going on more than 90. He won't be going on longer than another 4 years. So I think he'll be ambitious. He'll want to leave his mark in the next few years.
Let's just have a look at a clip. And I'm sorry, I didn't cue this up beforehand, but as you're speaking, I thought of it. I saw it today. Because even though when we're on holiday, Robert, the political news never turns off. And this is actually coming from Pondering Politics, which is an American version of this. It's a guy who does commentary on. And Face the Nation in the weekend had old mate Lindsay, getting a bit pissy about the questions surrounding some of Trump's appointees. I'm going to try and jump into here sort of mid-term. To see if I can find the spot that I'm trying to get. So we'll hit and hope and see what happens.
Tax increase. I want to cut spending, but my number one priority is to secure that border quickly.
Well, we will watch the politics of the possible with the very complicated caucus in the House.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about the Senate, though, because you are on the Judiciary Committee. Kash Patel, the pick to run the FBI, doesn't even have a hearing scheduled yet. In his 2022 memoir, Bill Barr said of Kash Patel, he's someone with no background as an agent, would never be able to command the respect necessary to run the day-to-day operations of the Bureau. He has virtually no experience that would qualify him to serve at the highest level of the world's preeminent law enforcement agency. The idea of moving him into a role like this showed a shocking detachment from reality. Was Attorney General Barr wrong then and wrong now?
Yeah, he was wrong then, he's wrong now, and I take my advice on Kash Patel from Trey Gowdy, dear friend from South Carolina who worked with Kash. Kash was a public defender, he was a prosecutor, he worked with Trey Gowdy about the Russia hoax. So
Look, there's more of it, but I think we can leave it there because Lindsey Graham then spins off into news about Israel and various bits and pieces. But Kash Patel is an example of what you're speaking of. There's probably what most people are thinking is the most dangerous example, I would say, of what you're talking about. Loyalty over skill set, over appropriate appointment.
Yeah, and I would say there's two other appointments that are perhaps even more of a gamble than the one we've just discussed, and that was Tulsi Gabbard for the Director of National Intelligence, whose impartiality on a range of issues would be seriously questioned by intelligence professionals. She was something of an apologist for President Assad and also speaks very highly of President Putin at every opportunity, a leader who's invaded a neighboring country. And also Pete Hegseth, the nominee for the defense position, whose only qualification was that he was a Fox, commentator and anchor and a bit of a favorite of Mr. Trump. So we'll have to see what happens. To be fair, sometimes people who come to a job with a great track record disappoint, and sometimes people exceed expectations. So, I don't think we can be too judgmental up front. But this is a country with a lot of talent in it. There's more than 340 million people. And over many years looking at politics, my impression is that when people are appointed on the basis of loyalty rather than ability and experience, it usually backfires on the person doing the appointing, because it'll be Mr. Trump who faces the heat when some of his favorites are not up to the job.
The one thing about Kash Patel, and sorry, Chewie, for being dominant here, but you had a whole Friday night show without me, so I'm just getting payback. One of the things about Kash Patel in particular is he has this list of enemies that he's promising to get back in up to and including media figures. He says he's going to get revenge on journalists. But that seems to be, whether he does or doesn't, you're putting someone in place with this power, the preeminent police force in the world, some would say, for someone who says, and I am going to come after these people. So even though you're right, I agree with you, they may perform well. When you come in with that much baggage, there's just that much more concern.
Yeah, but the trouble is, Pat, and I'm as equally concerned as you are about that particular appointment, is that we do not know whether this campaign rhetoric is going to translate into actual practice in office. Somebody once said that we're all tigers out of office. Once you've got the responsibility of running the country, it may slow down people like Patel. We'll wait and see. But I agree, they're disturbing comments and should never be made. And I'm actually very concerned about Mr. Trump's threats to the media. He's put what he calls mainstream or legacy media, as he derisively calls it, on notice that if they are unfriendly or acting or what he calls perpetuate what he calls fake news, then he won't hesitate to threaten them to take their license away to broadcast. So that again, I think it's very dangerous when politicians lay into the media. I don't like it when they do it here. The reason is, in a liberal democracy, politicians are elected to answer questions amongst other things, and they're expected to take tough questions. So nothing irritates me more personally when I hear politicians whinging about what is part of their job. That is, they present themselves as victims of unscrupulous journalists who often are simply asking the questions that you and I want to hear. So
100%.
It seems to be very unfortunate, to say the least.
I want to do one more question, Chewie, then I'm going to back away and you can take over. Because you talked about the appointments that he was making, like Kash Patel, but the other thing that seems to be concerning about his tenure is going even harder against some of those names and workers that you don't see in front of the cameras. Being reported that scores of career US State Department diplomats resign before Trump's inauguration. Let me just read these two paragraphs from stuff.co.nz. Scores of senior career diplomats are resigning from the State Department effective at noon on Monday after receiving instructions to do so from President-elect Donald Trump's aides. Said three US officials familiar with the matter. The forced departures aimed at establishing a decisive break from the Biden administration will see an exodus of decorated veterans of the Foreign Service, including John Bash, the Undersecretary for Management and Acting Undersecretary for Political Affairs, and Jeff Pyatt, the Assistant Secretary for Energy Resources, said the officials, who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss personal decisions ahead of Monday's inauguration. Now, the thing is, they are serving at the president's pleasure. He can ask them to step down and move them aside, but no president really does it on the scale that Trump is looking at, just so he can then implement on the second, third, fourth level down more sycophants that are going to do his willing, more yes men that aren't going to men and women that aren't going to question him. Which would be more concerning, the Kash Patels or the thousands of diplomats who we don't know about that are going to be moved aside?
Both. I think is the answer to your question, because it's worrying that you've got people who may not be particularly competent in the cabinet being appointed on the basis of loyalty by Mr. Trump. It's even more worrying when seasoned and experienced public servants who've served a variety of administrations and do so impartially are removed, because it could create the perfect storm. Because in the past, it's no secret that incompetent cabinet ministers or cabinet secretaries or appointees have sometimes been bailed out of trouble by their public servants.
Yep.
And if ever, on the basis of the appointments that Trump wants to make at the cabinet level, if ever a president needed experienced public servants in place, it's this administration. And yet he's seeking to extend the process of loyalty to further down across the public service. I think he could be heading for the perfect storm. I think America could be heading for a degree of disruption that it hasn't seen for a long time. And more disturbingly, in a democracy, it seems that he wants to create an authoritarian style of leadership. This is the sort of stuff you get in authoritarian states where Mr. Putin appoints all his mates from the intelligence service in the Russian government. But of course, we don't expect this in a liberal democracy where there is an ethos of professional public servants who serve, they serve whoever's elected. And that is worrying. I think it's a really retrograde step. And I know Mr. Trump is very anxious to make his mark, but I think he could be making his mark I'm not sure he's thought this through fully, and I'm not sure he's got such how shall I put it, a commanding position in the Republican Party. I'm not sure anyone is giving him candid advice about this. Lindsey Graham, you had a clip there from Lindsey Graham. He's just a classic politician who sort of revolves in orbit around Trump because, like J.D. Vance, a big critic of Trump in the past, but saw that Trump was surviving and thriving, and therefore has accommodated himself, and now basically considers himself a devoted Trump supporter. So there's a lot of people like that around Trump. Is anybody going to say to Trump, "Don't do this; it will hurt you, and hurt your administration"? I don't think so.
I'm done, Chewie. You can jump in, but I just thought I laughed there when you said I'm not sure he's fully thought this through. Speaking of Trump, that could be on his grave. I think that's there we go. Chewie, sir, you.
Look, I've paid extra attention to the. I guess it's a confirmation hearing or something of Pete Hegseth.
Oh my God!
And that was so. This is a guy that's been tapped to be the Secretary of Defense because he's a combat veteran, was seen to be the big thing. But I think more to the point, it's because he's a Fox News veteran. And that confirmation hearing was an absolute train wreck. And it's not even the only one that they've had out of here. Like they've brought up the fact that he has white supremacist tattoos. It brings up the fact that he never really occupied any leadership positions in the military. And we have gone from, in Trump's first term, tapping some actual generals and stuff like that. Mattis comes to mind. Before chucking him out because he wasn't going to toe Trump's party line, I guess. And now we've cleared through what I would call the adults in the room. And he is now tapping 19, I think, to date, Fox News alumni and staff to fill important government positions. And I think it was mentioned right at the start that he is stacking the deck with yes men. Rather than competent operators that can make their government function in spite of Trump, because no one's going to stick their hand up and go, yeah, I want to be part of this administration now. A lot of these people are going to be carrying the flag for America overseas, setting foreign policy. I think, in my view, we're going to have an even more unhinged US foreign policy in the next 4 years than we've ever seen. Would that be close to your view, Robert?
I think so, Chewie. There is also going to be some pretty big battles because some of the people that Mr. Trump has appointed in the cabinet and in the national security area actually contradict his stated policies. Remember that Mr. Trump promised to bring peace to Ukraine within 24 hours. But then his Ukrainian boy, General Kellogg, actually takes the view that the West must back Ukraine and drive out Russian troops from Ukraine. In addition, Rubio, the Secretary of State, he is also another person who doesn't necessarily take the view there has to be a peace at Ukraine's expense, that there must be a land for peace deal. So yeah, I think there'll be going to be division within the government over what to do. As I said before, when you're in opposition, you don't have power. You can make all sorts of pronouncements, and Mr. Trump's very good at this. The pronouncement he made over Ukraine, by the way, does mirror and parallel the pronouncement he made in 2015 when he was running for the presidency. In 2016, and he said that he would solve the ISIS problem within 24 hours. When he was challenged about that in the media, he said that he'd love to reveal the details of his master plan, but it would alert the enemy to it, so he won't. But in fact, he didn't do that. And we know now that he's already rowing back from the Ukraine commitment. What worries me as someone, or it should worry all of us in New Zealand, we have a president now who will consider that he's got a sweeping mandate to implement his vision of the world. What is his vision of the world? Well, his vision of the world is that the world should be run by great powers, and above all by the United States, which is the greatest power of all.
Yep.
And he has scant regard for international institutions, and he has scant regard for the interests of small countries and middle powers. So, we've been hurt by the first Trump administration when it undermined the World Trade Organization, an organization which helped us, through its workings, prevail in 7 trade disputes. He's undermined that machinery of an impartial disputes resolution mechanism when countries are having loggerheads over trade. He's removed that deliberately because he wants the old dynamic of power prevailing in disputes between trade. So in short, I think Mr. Trump's vision of the world is very different from that of New Zealand. New Zealand, like many countries, wants to see international relations based on the principles, based on principles and rules and norms rather than raw power. And I think we're heading back to a sort of dog-eat-dog international arena where the biggest can throw their weight around. That's it. I'm not saying he'll achieve that. I'm saying I think that's the motivation. And obviously it's a bit worrying because we're facing problems in the international arena which don't respect borders. Problems like climate change, pandemics, transnational terrorism, problems of an extended global economy. None of those problems can be fixed by America having even more power in the international arena. So it's a bit worrying.
Hey, Robert, it's been amazing to have you on. First guest, first night, first show back for me and Chewie. So thank you so much for being a part of what we're doing. When are you back in Dunedin?
On the 28th of January.
We'll have to see if you've got any more little contacts in your little black book there that we can maybe hit up over in the over in Europe. You might bring some friends we can talk to or something.
Okay.
Maybe.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Robert, thanks so much for joining us. Be safe, be well. Enjoy your time over there with family, and we really appreciate you being a part of the first show. All the best.
Thank you.